What do we make of this massive operation by the Ukrainians to strike at strategic bombers deep, thousands of miles deep inside of Russia using drones? Got a great guest to dive into this with. Josiah Lippincott is with us. He is a PhD candidate at Hillsdale College. Very well done, sir. And a former Marine as well. Josiah, just talk a bit about this operation. What do you think it shows, and what do you think it does, if anything, given that there's these peace talks that are happening now? How do you see all this?
Yeah, this war, I believe, is just absolutely crazy, and it's nihilistic, it's destructive. American involvement in Ukraine has been a disaster for the American people, and I think what it shows is that the foreign policy expert class that got us into this conflict have demonstrated a completely irrational understanding of global geopolitics. What Ukraine is doing is dangerous. I think it's stupid for themselves. And it is what the real problem here is that the United States is deeply involved. And I would not be surprised to learn that the United States or some element within the American government helped plan an attack on what is essentially Russian nuclear capability. And it doesn't matter what you think about the morality of the Russian regime. We need to be thinking in a serious way about the wider ramifications of this conflict. And that means we need to come back to reality. We need to come out of the dream world of moralism that the American left has adopted as its framework.
So what do you think the Trump administration should do, if anything, other than what they are doing, or how do you see the efforts to bring about the ceasefire so far? Because, Trump, I mean, I remember I talked to him about this, a few years ago, even when Russia invaded. And he was just saying, look, it wouldn't have happened under my watch. I think he's on very strong ground there because it didn't happen on his watch, and it very easily could have. He also says, I'm going to bring this to an end very, very quickly. Very quickly is subject to interpretation, but certainly so far it feels like Putin isn't feeling the kind of heat that might be necessary to get him to get to a ceasefire. Or is this what you expected? I mean, how do you see that part of the negotiations up until now?
Yeah, I would say I'm at the point right now that Trump should relieve anyone who's telling him that he can bring the war to an end through negotiating pressure on Putin. I think that simply is not in the cards right now. The real problem here is Ukraine. The problem is they have all of this foreign and weapons. They are wedded to, I believe, an insane nationalistic not even nationalistic, because what they're really doing is siding with the West against their near abroad superpower neighbor. And for the Russians, whether right or wrong, they believe Ukraine is an integral part of their sphere of influence, and they are not going to tolerate Western influence there. And if you look at the history of the color revolutions that the United States government sponsored in Ukraine on Russian borders, if what we had done to Ukraine was done to us, we would be livid. We would have problems, for instance, and we have had problems, for instance, with the placement of nuclear weapons from a foreign superpower on this continent. That was the Cuba crisis in the 1960s. So what I'm seeing now is that Putin wants Ukraine solved. And what that means right now is killing as many Ukrainians as possible, dragging out the war. A lot of American policymakers say this war is a good investment because we're able to bleed Russia. Mm-hmm. And I think the Russians are saying that in reverse. This war is a great investment because it's a way to bleed NATO and bleed Ukraine, and you're essentially solving two problems at once. And it's true, they're taking heavy casualties, but they are willing to do so because Russia wants to be sovereign, and they see this as integral to their sovereignty. And at a deeper level, the reason that we're involved in Ukraine is, and Zbigniew Brzezinski, the former national security advisor for Jimmy Carter, in his book on the subject, he's saying the reason we need to care about Ukraine is because Stalin and Hitler cared about Ukraine. And I would argue that for the United States today, we should not root our foreign policy in what Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin thought was important to them. That's not the way we should think about geopolitics. We need to think about this war from the standpoint of what is good for the American people. And getting into a conflict that threatens to bleed into a wider conventional conflict involving European states, potentially nuclear exchange, though that would be a major step. It's all risk, and there's no real reward here. We are embarrassing ourselves on the international scene because we can't bring the war to a close. We can't put enough pressure on Russia. Their immense natural resources, their willingness to suffer, and their dedication to solving what they see as a problem on their border is really redounding back on us in a way that is extremely destructive for us. Right now, I would say if President Trump wants peace, the side that needs to feel pressure is Ukraine. And that means putting pressure on the forces in the American government that want to keep this war going. That means putting pressure on the Senate. It means putting pressure on the foreign policy establishment in DC and putting pressure on the Europeans. We need to frame an international order in a way that the great powers can live together in relative peace. And that doesn't mean we have to approve of what Putin does inside of his own borders. It means we need to think in a serious way about what geopolitics means for the American people and for the security of our rights.
Let's come back and talk about this terrorist attack in Colorado here in just a second. But first up, our sponsor here is Birch Gold. Gold is a long-term play. I've been an investor in gold myself personally for over a decade, going on 2 decades now. Look, the debt's not going away. In fact, we're about to raise the debt ceiling $5 trillion. The only way that we're going to continue to have our government function when it comes to spending is printing money. There's going to be inflation, and it's going to erode the value of the dollars in your savings account. That's just the inevitable reality we face right now. What can you do about it? This is where gold comes in. Birch Gold Group is who I trust, and Birch Gold Group can help you transition an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold. There's no obligation when you text Birch Gold at 989898. That's right. Text Birch Gold 989898 by texting Buck, my name. So you text Buck to 989898, and Birch Gold will send you a free, no obligation info kit. A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau. Get gold you can hold or transition an existing IRA or 401k into gold. Text my name, Buck, to 989898 and get in touch with Birch Gold today. All right, Josiah. So we had this terror attack. Did you see the CNN clowns who this guy's yelling Free Palestine at a vigil for, the hostages that Hamas has taken? He's yelling Free Palestine. I think his name is like Mohammed something or other. And the people went on CNN, the so-called national security experts, including the former deputy director of the FBI, McCabe, who's a world-class scumbag. And they said we shouldn't jump to conclusions about this. You can't make this stuff up.
Indeed, we cannot. I also understand from Bill Melgren that this guy is an illegal immigrant, that he was a visa overstay from 2023, brought in by the Biden people. Malugin, yeah, excuse me. Yeah, and you've got this guy who's an illegal immigrant who is invested in this foreign conflict. And so because of our immigration policies and because of our interventions abroad, we now have these foreign conflicts playing out in our own streets. And I don't know if you saw, there was a trans pride flag in the background of this guy throwing, Molotov cocktails and burning these people at this Gaza vigil. And this is clown world. This is insane. We can't have this. I've said before, and I'm going to say it again, we should absolutely, any person flying a foreign flag and protesting on behalf of that country in the United States should be deported to that country. I am so tired of having these foreign conflicts happening in my communities. It's bad for us.
Yeah, it strikes me as particularly absurd that you have so many people who come into this country pretending that they want asylum, and then when they're here waiting for their fake asylum, in this case, the guy's a terrorist, but even beyond that, you have them engaging in political agitation on our soil. So you're imagine the mentality of, my home country is such a crap hole that I need to be with you guys because it's unsafe for me to go home. As we know, this isn't even really true.
Right.
There's all these cases of like Somali refugees, for example. A lot of them are in the Minnesota area, or in Minnesota. And they've gotten refugee status or asylum, and then they go home on vacation here and there to go back to Somalia to like visit friends and family. And you're like, if you need asylum from a place, you're not going there on vacation. But it's a scam, right? The whole thing is a scam, and I think that people are seeing more and more of that, and that's important because finally the truth is coming out.
Yeah, we need to have a sovereign country. That means we need to have the right to stay neutral in conflicts abroad. And that's so hard for liberals to hear because what they want to do is care about everywhere all the time in the same way. And my argument is we need to have the ability to just say, we're taking a step back. Because if we don't, then we're seeing what we see now. We're invested in conflicts happening half a world away, and then these conflicts end up back here. This is not a good way to have a successful country.
Yeah, I think that the explosion of lunacy that we're seeing on these college campuses too. It's funny. You're a Hillsdale PhD student, and you have
Right.
all these Democrats who will say, "Well, how would you feel about Hillsdale if they didn't get their hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government?" It's like you
Right.
guys, the
We
people just don't
don't.
get it. Like the scam
They
has been
don't.
run so long that they
Right.
have no sense of. The Democrats have already done everything they can to leverage the public purse for their side and to take over these
Yes.
institutions. And any competing institution, of course, they make sure they don't get any federal dollars.
Right. Well, and I think at this point, I don't want to get federal money. What I want to do
Right.
is take away federal money from the left. If you took away taxpayer funding for the radical left today, almost all of this stuff would immediately implode. Americans do not want this crazy. And that's what the last election really showed us. Americans want a new pathway forward. They want to have a real country. They want to have law and order. They want to get out of these stupid wars. They want inflation to go down. They want sound money. They want a free market where they're not being oppressed by the state everywhere they go. And to have that, we need to have border security and we need to have a sane foreign policy. And this is an easy layup. Easy layup.
It has been interesting to me to see that the usual tactics. You remember, I'm sure, under the first Trump term, Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman AOC, down at the border holding the fence, did like a photo shoot.
Right.
Like she was, on the cover of Vanity Fair or something. Photo shoot, she's crying, and it's also inhumane and also horrible. The teary-eyed, oh my gosh, how could they do this stuff isn't working as well, especially when the Democrats are rallying around somebody like Abrego Garcia, who got sent to El Salvador, who is
Yeah.
a reputed member of MS-13. It turns out they couldn't turn on the waterworks enough with all the tears to make people, normal Americans, care
Yeah.
about some non-American who got sent back to his country.
Yes, and I think it was Twitter user Captive Dreamer he found all the Instagram photos of Garcia's MS-13 tattoos on his knuckle that
Mm-hmm.
his girlfriend had tried to cover up, and you're just like, this is who the Democrats are going to weep for. This is their hero. I mean, the Democrats and the left. The great news for those of us who are sane is that our opponents are nuts. They have no grasp on reality. They are literally going to bat for these gangbangers. And who, by the way, cares about ordinary Americans? Who is really invested in trying to keep fentanyl from flowing into the country? I think I saw an article today. Some media outlet was like, "Whoa, it's true. Fentanyl shipments are decreasing across the border." And it's like, right, because Trump is president. That's the reason that these things are happening. We finally have American leadership that cares about Americans. And right now the left is wedding itself to crazy. And in a way that's terrible for the country, but it is good for those of us who want to try and restore sanity here.
What do you think about what we know, at least so far, of what Secretary of Defense Hegseth and his team are trying to do over the Pentagon? You're a Marine, former Marine. Is this the kind of stuff that you would have expected? Do you want to see more? I just wanted your assessment of some of the policy changes underway. Saying like trans troops aren't going to be deployed, that kind of stuff.
Right. I like it. I like Hegseth. I think it's all steps in the right direction. They're getting back to a culture that's oriented toward winning wars, which is what it needs to be right now. And so I hear from people I know in the military, just there's been a more freedom of speech, more freedom of thought that's happening now that you don't have so much crazy in charge. I think, however, there's just a lot more to do, and I don't blame that on Hegseth and his team. I just think the left has been burrowing away for so long that it will take a lot to get back to really clear and cogent understanding of what we need to be doing in terms of foreign policy and warfighting capacity. And that's a lot of work. And we need to get support for Trump now, and then we need to win in 28. I want to see JD Vance in there for another 8 years. We need just time to get these institutions as reformed as possible. And Trump has shown us the way forward. So am I happy about it as a Marine? It's awesome. The Biden years were really dark. They were really, really bad for my men who I know stayed in the Marine Corps. Some of them were kicked out because of vaccine mandates. And it was horrible what was done to them. And they need justice. And it's just good to know that you have someone like Pete Hegseth who is in there. He understands the perspective of the guy on the front lines. He's not simply a DC bureaucrat. And it's such a breath of fresh air. It's just awesome to have someone like that in there. I want him to have success. I want him to get these reform through, and I want to see them go even further. There's just a lot more to be done.
Our sponsor here is the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. Israel is under attack. Missile fire has resumed from Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, and they all seek Israel's destruction. For so many people, this is a difficult moment, but it's also a moment where there is the opportunity to stand with Israel. That's why we've partnered with the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews on the Clay and Buck Show to help provide life-saving aid and security essentials. Your urgently needed gift today will help provide essentials like bomb shelters, flak jackets, and bulletproof vests for first responders, armored security vehicles, ambulances, and more. Join me in standing with Israel. Call to make your gift at 888-488-IFCJ. That's 888-488-4325. Or go online at supportifcj.org. That's supportifcj.org. So Josiah, when can I read your PhD thesis?
Well, I'm hoping I have a draft right now. I have the committee looking at it. And I hope one day to have it published and to get it out there and fit for consumption. It's academic and scholarly, but my aim is to have citizens and policymakers alike be able to read it and gain something from it.
Are we allowed to know the topic?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it stems from my time when I was deployed to Okinawa back in 2019. And I began to wonder, I said, why are we still here in Japan 75 years after the Second World War? And that question led me to consider, why did we fight the Empire of Japan to begin with? And it was helpful to contrast the founders' foreign policy, which aimed at the protection of American rights, with the much more crusading foreign policy of the later liberals like Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt. And it was helpful to see those two things in contrast. The founders, I believe, were much more hard-headed. They had an understanding of what war was for. War is designed to protect the rights of Americans. And that means we do not want to provoke war, because Americans die in conflicts, and we don't want that to happen. We don't want to spend their tax dollars on war unless we absolutely have to. And the founders had a very clear framework for thinking about foreign policy engagement. And I think policymakers and citizens now would gain from seeing their wisdom and understanding it more fully. And that's the aim of my dissertation, is to take these ideas and show their relevance to problems we face in our own time.
Josiah, appreciate you being with me.
Buck, thank you so much for your time.